I love my job. I was a consultant, and that's what I did. I solved problems for big companies, mostly Aon, again, Motorola. And then
what happened back then that made you understand that improving focus or decision making was going to change the way the brain functioned across the board, like you said?
it didn't just help them perform better in the most stressful of environments, but it also helped overcome the wounds of war, post-traumatic stress, concussions, anxiety, and depression. We bring as many different challenges to the brain as possible at the same time, and that's what makes the brain change really fast, because our brains will do whatever we ask it to do.
What is one thing that you absolutely believe to be true? Hello and welcome everybody to this episode of the Game Changer Podcast. My name is Michelle Dutro. I'm your host, and I am joined today by John Kennedy. Not that one. So stick with me here. This is not a political show. You're going to love it though. Let me just not waste a second of your time and let's dive in. Today's guest is John Kennedy, founder of Combat Brain Training. And before the word combat makes you think this conversation isn't for you, let me say this clearly. It most certainly is. While John originally developed this work for elite military units in 2007 at the request of the Marines, might I add, wanting to improve focus and decision-making, logic would tell you that special operations and military need to be at their peak, so they tapped him to say, hey, can you give us a hand here? Operating under extreme stress, what he discovered is that the brain responds to pressure the same way whether you're in combat, the boardroom, parenting, or navigating burnout. Like I said, this episode is for you. So here we go. Today, his methods are used by people of all ages and backgrounds to improve focus, decision-making, emotional regulation, and resilience. If you have a brain and live in a stressful world, this conversation will benefit you. All right, John, what did I leave out that folks need to know about you before we launch in?
No, that was a great intro. It's exactly, and then you're going to want to find out why it can help all these people, right?
Oh, this is the we're going to Neuroplasticity 101 is what's happening today. We're going to dive in. But before we get into the nuts and bolts of how, why, and who it works for and all of that, because I can promise you we are going to dive into that, walk us through your journey. How do you get to the point where the Marines are saying, John, we could use your help? So just walk us through your life, how that happened, and then where you are now.
So I'm an old guy, so I'll try to make it short because I had a lot of life
Not
to
an
share.
old guy.
But started young, very young age. Grew up way up in the woods in New York, always trying to solve problems. Lived in Japan for high school, and so just solving problems became a natural thing. You live in a country where they don't speak your language. We would try to get lost when we were kids, and then just try to find our way back. So anyway, that was kind of always my thing. My dad kind of helped me with that. But basically I kind of set the channel of my life. So went into consulting after that, and I got a reputation as being able to solve one of my clients' has unsolvable problems. Basically started to develop a methodology to tackle any problem in a very specific way that got results. So we're talking about big problems like rescuing the entire Y2K transition of a division of Motorola, to developing the world's first handheld device to measure energy efficiency of buildings. This is back in the late 70s. So always loved solving problems. And so that was my reputation. I love my job. I was a consultant. And that's what I did. I solved problems for big companies, mostly Aon, again, Motorola. And then my brother came back from Iraq in 2006 and said, improvised explosive devices, the booby traps that kill so many of us are killing us. Can you help? And I thought, man, my kid brother, my hero, let's see what we can do. Maybe we could help save lives instead of just, help businesses make more money. And I really dug into it. I got invited to an event the Marines held every year at 29 Palms. And the whole purpose of that event was to invite contractors from around the world and expose us to a long weekend of anything about as much information about IEDs as they could cram into us as possible. So we went on patrols they scared the crap out of us. They blew stuff up. We had to really try to experience what these young Marines were doing on the field. Just amazing stuff. We had to look at all the different types of trigger devices and all this stuff. And I'm thinking, I'm a process guy. I make processes more efficient. Well, the Marines, they're about as process centric as possible, right? There's no way I could help them with their processing. But what occurred to me was the Marines who led us around, our guides, had all survived IED attacks. And the consistent story they said was they started to go down this one street or this one alley. Something told them something was wrong. And so they went a different way, but the guys behind them got attacked. So I'm thinking, why do we have two Marines, similar demographics, similar training? One has better, what we would call intuition, not just sensing the danger, but acting on it. So the very last day, I'm shaking hands with the base commander, General Doug Stone, who fortunately, and any this kind of whole God train link all the way through. Any other general, they wouldn't have gotten what I was trying to do. But he'd been a reservist. He'd run companies, and I explained. I just had this kind of God wink. What if I could do the same thing for the brain that I do for operations? Make them more efficient, really, really quickly. Maybe we can improve intuition. So then Doug helped me get my first contract. And so here I am, a few months later at the K base. So the only base, good thing for me, they could find for me to develop night program was in Hawaii. So K base. So got to live in Hawaii for the next several years, which was great. But the challenge was how do we really make a difference in Marines in a way that we can really see the difference? So it was a full DoD experiment. A platoon of 40 guys was randomly chosen, and I got to pick the platoon that I wanted as my experiment platoon. And so we had a before and after cognitive skills tests, and then I had only 3 months to develop my program. So a lot of people said there's no way, right? So any other psychology or medical type experiment takes years. Well, I'm a consultant, right? I know that you're successful or you get fired. So I had 3 months. That's all I had. So I embedded with these Marines and I asked for the worst platoon in the battalion. And these guys were amazing, but had really struggled a lot. They'd lost 16 guys the cycle before, rampant post-traumatic stress, 3 attempted suicides. They just were failing a lot. So I embedded with these guys, and they're the ones who really helped me develop I couldn't have done it without them, my first exercises. And so the requirements were kind of simple. One, it couldn't be digital. Digital does not really challenge our brain much. They had to be portable. They had to be fun and engaging so they would do them. And they were based on research out of MIT at the time that found a very specific type of stimulation starts to change the brain immediately. Because our brains are always changing from what we do. You throw a baseball 10,000 times, you're going to be a better pitcher, right? But it takes a while to get that 10,000 in. I needed something fast. So we worked on these different exercises. I experimented with different ones and narrowed it down to just a few. But the main thing was 3 months later, the cognitive skills assessment, they were significantly better than the control platoon. But most importantly, they were completely transformed in their performance. They were now the best performing platoon in the battalion. And when they went to final pre-deployment training at 29 Palms, they were one of the best ever to go through training, the instructor said. So then that's how it started to spread. So it's from there, the XO of that battalion took over a battalion of Special Operations Marines. So that's how we got into Special Operations. And it just kind of spread by reputation. So recon Marines, Navy SEALs, snipers, pilots over the next several years. But what was really significant to me, I didn't expect this, but what was amazing about this from those results, it didn't just help them perform better in the most stressful of environments, but it also helped overcome the wounds of war, post-traumatic stress, concussions, anxiety, and depression. And that's why now we work with people of a huge spectrum of people, from high performers to people really struggling. And I've learned as we've gone through this, it basically everything goes through our brain. And when you make your brain better, faster, more, just like getting a new computer, all your applications work better. It doesn't matter what the application is. And I'm continuing to learn. I've had several neuroscientists help me. I learn a lot from the clients that I work with. But that's kind of the short version of, of my origin story. That's why
I
I'm here.
Okay, so the perfect backdrop for all of the questions that we're going to go through because I really am very interested in this. As you know, my background is in biofeedback, so all
Yeah.
things that can help us to understand eh, what we're feeling and why, and being more coherent, brain and heart, and just changing the way we operate in the world. And you and I are on the same mission as it relates to that. What this, as you said, this was, you were setting out here to help the Marines to have more focus and work on decision making. Happenstance, which I love because I think some of our best discoveries are the,
Yes.
oh my gosh, who knew,
Right.
3M, right, could tell you that with their sticky notes. Who knew? And so I'm curious, going back to that time, what were the aha moments that you had around brain function and connectivity and thoughts, or maybe default mode network? I'm just interested to know what happened back then that made you understand that improving focus or decision making was going to change the way the brain functioned across the board, like you said, anxiety or depression or PTSD. What happened there?
Yeah. I think it was a series of those things. So I knew that I needed to help these guys any way I could. And I still remember, so I was embedded with these guys for the 3 months. The first time we got all the platoons together afterwards for a big battalion event, because I had taken it for granted that these changes these guys were making. When they were in the same big room with other platoons, I was shocked at the difference, how more mature they were, how relaxed they were. The staff sergeant tells them something to do, they would just do it. Um, and they took really pride in that. I mentioned the three suicides. They actually had T-shirts made called they called themselves the Suicide Kings, kind of a finger in the eye to all the guys who had, made fun of them before. I mean, their whole demeanor had changed. And that's when I really started to see the broader ramifications of this. And then moving on to others like, the MARSOC, the Marine Special Operations guys I work with, the stories they were telling me, they were getting along better with their family. They were, all these different lifestyle improvements that were happening that were not just the people I was helping, but the people that depended on them were being helped as well. Another, along the way, so I mentioned neuroscientists. So again, I'm not a researcher. I'm a consultant. That's a fix a problem. But the way I did my research is I would take a neuroscientist through the program and they would tell me from their vast experience what they knew was happening. So, and that's when the lights clicked on. So when I know that I'm working with people and they're laughing and they're having fun when they're doing these exercises, their brains are changing. Well, it was a neuroscientist at Northwestern that says, well, because of the way the program works, you're actually releasing dopamine and endorphins and doing it together. So that's why they feel really good. And that was kind of an aha moment. Another one that was really powerful, a neuroscientist from Harvard who said, this is probably the most powerful anti-aging program I've ever experienced. And I'm like, why? I don't know why. He says, because you're flooding the brain with so much blood. What you're doing is you're restoring the capillaries that typically when they dry out or, the neurons die, and that's why we lose our memory. So he says you're going to be able to reverse memory loss. You're creating neurogenesis, and so I was able to match that up with what I was experienced from the people I was working with.
So I know for a fact, because I'm certainly one of the people listening right now who are saying, okay, for crying out loud, what in the world is in this program? I mean, you've
Yes,
got to give us a
yeah,
couple of what
yes,
are people
well,
doing? Just
yes,
a couple of things, especially things that might surprise someone. That are some activities or exercises, or what are a couple of things that folks are doing that are making a significant difference? That, like I said, might
yeah.
surprise you.
Well, so there's a lot of things I've learned where I can help people and I give people advice, but the key is one of the hallmarks of my consulting was simplicity. It had to be simple, right? That anybody could do it and get the improvements. And that's again another God thing. When I was developing this from the Marine Corps, my daughter was 5. And I wanted her to be able to do the same thing to improve as a Marine. And so originally, I knew that I needed some sort of symbols that required a decision because we really want to train executive function, right? We want to make the brain be able to make better decisions, better and better and faster. And so I experimented with all different kinds of symbols. Well, my daughter, because she was 5, I came up with a series of symbols that is so simple a 5-year-old can do. We're talking about so simple, we're just colored arrows. There's a lot of programs that kind of go along it, but nothing like this because the purpose wasn't, the symbol doesn't matter. So if you want to be surprised, if you look at the exercise, it's like, well, how can that possibly make a difference? Right? I kind of liken it to going to the gym and seeing dumbbells. How can a hunk of metal make me stronger? Well, it's how you lift it that makes a difference. And so the way that's so simple, the brain thinks it's simple. And so when we give it, we always do a baseline. For 15 years now, we've done a before and after measure of processing speed, which is consistent to real world benefits. But after that, we have people make decisions using these simple symbols, and we make them a little bit harder each time. Now, in the beginning, there was a little booklet actually of 480 of these symbols. But I found that it's much more effective to put them all on one piece of paper. And it's amazing. I should take you through this sometime. I think you'd really enjoy it. Basically, what happens is you can see people making their decisions. They start at the top consciously and they're very careful about each one. After a while, they don't need to think about it. They start to get into flow state. And then the conscious mind will pop back in and say, hey, I'm doing pretty good here, or what's going on, or what's going on next Tuesday, whatever distracts them. And then they pull themselves back. So, one of the most powerful benefits is focus, not because they're trying to focus, but the brain gets its reward, a little bit of dopamine release every time it does the right decision. And so so typically in 35, 40 minutes, people are doing variations that they couldn't have done when we started. And then every time we meet, we bring in more parts of the brain, we bring in eyes, ears, hands, feet, we use a metronome. In other words, we bring as many different challenges to the brain as possible at the same time. And that's what makes the brain change really fast because our brains will do whatever we ask it to do. If we ask it to be lazy, it'll be lazy, right? If we ask it to work really hard in a short amount of time while it's having fun, then that's what makes those changes so fast.
So that's one of the things that I wanted to ask you about because I know that your program, that's kind of one of its claims to fame or hallmark is the speed. Is that
Yes.
this isn't, you know, let's talk about stress, anxiety, PTSD. This isn't 20 years of talk therapy on a couch. You're
Right,
seeing results quickly.
right, right.
And so in that specific arena, because I think it's fair to say that anybody listening has some relative experience with burnout, stress,
Yeah,
anxiety.
yeah.
So, for those folks, are you saying that this same training, or did you develop a different one? Or is that sort of an offshoot that when you're training the brain to be more efficient, almost the side effect, if you will, is that it's calmer, that the depression or the anxiety or the panic attacks alleviate themselves? Or is it a whole different program that you've developed for that?
No, and that's a really good question because you would think that would be like different for everybody. We do customize depending on what they're doing. So, for example, like an athlete, I think I mentioned one of my clients is now the highest, percentage quarterbacks in the Canadian Football League. So when I work with him, we work the brain, but then we also bring in sports specific motions like passing and everything. So those become unconscious. But the basic actually is the same for everyone because when the brain is faster and more focused, it alleviates so much. So anxiety and just recently worked with a young woman, very severe anxiety. Within 3 sessions, it was gone. I've got, talk about burnout. One of my favorite clients is a surgeon here in Las Vegas who was overwhelmed. Very good, right? He's trying to start his own practice, but it would take 6 hours to do one of his operations. So after working with me, he can do that same operation now in 2 hours, which is better for the patient, right? They're not as open as much, but that means he can do twice as many patients and then
Wow.
get home with his family in the same amount of time. So that's a huge stress reliever.
And it's
For
just that because that's got to get anybody's attention. You're a surgeon. You would think if it's a 6-hour surgery, it's because there's 6 hours worth of steps that you have to take. If you're
yeah.
going from 6 hours to two, were there just a lot of wasted steps that he realized, or is he just faster? I mean, how do you get a surgery from 6 hours to what happened?
Well, part of it is faster, and part of it is, in a surgeon, everybody's different, right? So I mean, the surgery is the same, but you've got to be able to make decisions.
Right.
This artery here, that there, this muscle, that, and that's what gets faster and more efficient. Because the exercises are simple. Now, I was a process guy, and I brought in some processes I defined that this program is helping, which nobody needs to know about. But basically, at a core level, we're improving processes like analysis and synthesis. Analysis is breaking things down. Synthesis is taking what we've broken and synthesizing it back to be something maybe even different. In between there's categorization and classification. So when we analyze something, there's bits of information. If we can categorize them and then
Mhm.
classify them, what's important, what's not important, what goes here, what goes there, and then we synthesize it back into something maybe even different, when that's the basically the decision making process for any of this type of work. And then there's another one, actually, all kind of lead up to something called abstract sequencing, which is where there's a lot of data coming in. We have to be able to take only what's important and then execute on it. And actually for that, I created a word called chronosynthesis, which I was fortunate because when I worked for the Special Operations Command, head of human performance loved that word. He goes, "This is what we got to go with," right? So basically, we want the brain processing constantly, but when you have to make a decision, you want to be able to pull only what it needs to for that decision to execute on, and not everything else. And so that's like with the surgeon, what he's doing, he's making the same decisions, but he's able to make them a lot faster because all those underlying processes are more efficient.
Okay, so I want to tie this to anxiety. I know it's one of the number one most Googled or now probably ChatGPT searches is how do I handle my anxiety? So is I could be completely wrong here, so I'm just trying to extrapolate what you're saying. So for anxiety, where the brain has decided this thing matters to such an extreme degree that it's giving me a panic attack.
Yeah.
Going through your program, you had said a gal with severe anxiety 3 sessions later, and she's fine. Is the brain now able to say, "Hey, this matters," but not to a, on a 1 to 100, I'm making myself go to 1,000. Is the brain now saying, "Yes, this matters, but not to a crazy degree," and maybe it doesn't matter at all? Is the brain able to say, "Does this matter, yes or no? To what degree does this matter? To what degree is this reasonable?" And then I can choose a response accordingly based on how important that thing is. I don't know. I'm just curious if that's
Yes,
any part
no.
of what the brain is doing under anxiety and panic attacks.
And that's really good insight because that's part of it. What mainly the main reason people get overwhelmed, the anxiety, and so is that they're just overwhelmed with too much information,
Correct.
right? If you're,
All of it matters to the same
yes,
extreme degree when it
right,
actually does not.
yeah,
But
exactly.
that's what's happening.
And that's where the classification comes in, right? So I mean, if you're processing information here and all of a sudden you get overwhelmed, right? There's just so much data. Well, if you can process it down here in the unconscious, now your conscious is free to make the better decisions.
Yes.
One of the things we create that is really come to really appreciate over time is something we call cognitively primed anticipation.
Mhm.
So that's basically another word for intuition. If your brain
Yep.
can anticipate that something's coming, it can prepare itself for what it needs to do unconsciously and then execute on it. And so that really removes a lot of what that churning and everything else that happens when people are anxious, get anxious. Now, another manifestation of that, which your listeners might like, which I love, that anticipation is I trained an Olympic skier a few years ago. And she said after the pro, and this really brought home to me, it was one of those aha moments, right? Because I wasn't really associating it so much with outside. She said she can ski much faster now without falling because she can see the snow conditions further out. So she's going down a hill at 100 miles an hour, right? But why is that? Her eyes are the same and the snow is the same. But because she can look out ahead, anticipate what's coming, all those little micro decisions she had to think about are now unconscious. So she can focus just on what she needs to do.
Okay. So I don't even know how you get this program, but folks, we're going to find out because now I'm going to tie this to this is a new year. Everybody out there, even if they say they don't, yes, they are. They're doing some form of goal setting, some form of in 2026, here's what I would like for my life financially, health, relationship, fill in the blank. Tell me if your program it would be aligned with this thinking as well. So because I coach a lot of people on figure out what your purpose is in life and then how do we make that happen. So I'm
Yeah.
looking at your program and is such a phenomenal way that the brain would work in this regard. So here's all the things that I say that I want. And then along the way, many things have shown up. that were the right opportunity, the right resource, the right person, and we just didn't recognize it. We
Yeah.
just didn't see it, so you can't act on something if you don't even realize it's there, right? And if we are thinking that this thing's got to be square and it's got to be orange and it's got to show up at 3 p.m. on a Thursday, yet the thing that will get you where you want to go could be purple on a Tuesday at, 7 p.m.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
But but
Right.
but if the brain is only saying this one thing versus, again, tell me if I'm wrong, if somebody went through your training and it's just trained now to think, hey, here's where I'm headed, pay it subconsciously first to all the things that fit like a puzzle, like you're saying, that are going to fit into, these things are going to be helpful to get me where I want to go, whether it's purple, orange, triangle, square. If it's in alignment with what I said I wanted, I will recognize it more quickly, thus be able to act on it. I mean, would it help in, at simplest terms, manifesting your goals?
Yes. And it's interesting you mentioned that because a lot of times what happens, we set our goals
Hmm.
and we start to go through life to their goals. There's actually kind of one of the prevailing psychology methodologies back to the time when I was working for the Marine Corps by Gary Klein. Basically, it's called recognition prime decision making. Basically, and that's was actually not good in an asymmetric warfare because what happens is recognition prime means if we see something, if something comes into our life, a new
Hmm.
stimulus, the first thing our brain will do is to go back and remember the last time we responded to that.
That's right.
And then that's what it will do, right?
Yep.
And that's the same thing with our goal setting. We can be moving forward. It's going to do it. So one of the goals and why the Marines were interested in this is my hypothesis back then was if we could reinsert the faster brain before that. So in other words, not yes, let's acknowledge that it's there, but if we could take in real-time data and assimilate it to what we're moving forward, then we can reduce the risk of following that, recognition prime decision making. And that's the same thing would help here. So if you're a lot more aware, you're a lot, you take in more data and you can then from all the data adjust as you need to be much more mentally agile,
Right.
then that can definitely help with your goals. Because you know what happens? People set a goal, they miss the goal, and they feel bad, and they give up. No,
Right. Right.
right? Let's
Or like I
adjust.
said, they just don't recognize because it wasn't the exact thing
Yes,
but it's not
right.
about the steps to get there. It's just, hey, overall, I'm headed this way. What's
Yeah,
everything that fits into that will help
yeah,
me get there? And
right.
that has got to be brain training of how to pay attention and
Yeah,
bring into your awareness when those things show up. And that
right,
is a training, that is a skill.
right. Exactly. Constantly taking new data, and that's where the classification comes in. New data comes in, discard it or stay with it,
That's
right?
right.
It's similar to what you're doing to just keep moving in your forward progress.
I love this. Okay, now let's go down a whole different path here because you had mentioned it already. And this is another thing that of all ages people deal with, but I'm very curious what you have found through your work, and especially in children, because we have this tendency in schools, at least public schools, that if Johnny's not learning the way the other 45 kids are in the class, then he's going to be on Ritalin or we're going to drug him or whatever we're going to do to make him fit into that mold. And certainly that's because we're going to say, because typically he's simply bored, but no, he's got ADHD.
Yeah,
So let's just specifically, and adults now are obsessed with taking every test under the sun to say, oh my gosh, I have ADHD. That's the problem for everything. So now I have the
right,
excuse, aka
right,
reason for why I get nothing done in my life. You know what I mean?
right.
So let's talk now specifically about the
Sure.
ADHD brain and
Yeah,
what your work is doing and what you have seen in that
yeah,
regard at any age. I'm
yeah.
just interested in all of it.
Well, it's funny because I was just sharing, my brother was a drill sergeant, and, of course, they had ADHD guys. I saw South Park, maybe you've seen it, it's pretty funny. It's probably how we dealt with ADHD in my where there's 3 kids, and the guy says, "This is how we cure ADHD," and they're all, hyper. He goes up to the first one, smacks him,
Smack.
says,
Yep.
"Do your work." Goes to the
Yep.
next one, the
Yep.
third, he's fine, right? So
Yep.
so part of the problem is we create ADHD in our school system, especially boys. Boys need to be a young boy. They need to be out there. They have all this,
Yep, absolutely.
adrenaline and everything running, all these hormones. They need to be running around. And what do we do in school? We
We
sit them
remove
in a,
recess.
we remove it.
We
Yeah, we
remove
take out
recess. We
the camera.
remove PE.
And if you remember, if you're old enough, you remember shop and and home ec and all of
Absolutely.
those things,
Yep,
because we engage the basis. So one of the basic philosophies this is based on theories was developed by an Australian named Dennis Jenkins, an educator, was part of very early IQ research, and his theory, and I really believe this, is that most of our cognitive skills are developed up until the age of 6 or 7 by two very important factors: interaction with our environment, and modeling from adults. It's the interaction with environment that kids miss now. They're 4 or 5 years old. They're in school somewhere instead of running around free, which they need to do.
yep,
Modeling from adults. I speak to parents groups a lot, and pet peeve is giving a phone to a child. Right? They don't need that. It's digital. It's not changing their brain. But just as important is the parents who are on their phone all the time. That removes that body. And that's huge. Parents,
huge.
take the phone away from the kids, but then mom's doing something stupid on Facebook instead of watching her kid on the swing. I mean,
Right.
all those things shape. But so now we have this, right? So now we have these kids in this situation, wherever, however they got there. One of the ways my program has helped with ADHD is it helps with selective focus. Some people call ADHD a hidden gift, right? Because they can multitask and things, but they don't
Right.
control that focus.
Right.
One of my favorites is a 10-year-old boy I started working with. His parents didn't want to put him on medication. And he was failing in school, although very, very bright. Most ADHD kids are very bright.
Yep.
And so the first time, so we do a baseline. This that speed of processing I was talked about. So now for 15 years, we start, and there's always a baseline. There's a direct correlation between performance in the real world and our ability to process information. So this young boy was probably one of the slowest ever. So the normal baseline is between a minute and a minute, 40 seconds, somewhere in there is the bell curve. So he was like over 3 minutes. And we could tell he was very hard to focus on this
Yeah.
symbol.
Distracted.
By the third one, he was under a minute, and he got his first day ever in school. And then about 6 weeks later, he was down around 40 seconds, but he was getting A's. He got Student of the Month award. And his grandmother, who I was helping with her dementia, said she was with him at his birthday party. Completely different child. Sat down, read a book to her. So we really can change the brain that way. And again, we don't. The coolest thing about what I love about my program is we don't tell the brain to do anything. It does whatever
Right.
it needs to do what we ask it to do, and it will change
Right.
physically very fast, and the changes are permanent. So that's pretty. And adults also with ADHD, same kind of thing. And same thing with anxiety. One of my favorite. We mentioned anxiety before. I was going to mention one of my. People typically work with me for a specific goal, right? So this is a young man starting his own business. He said, "You got to help me with my anxiety and whatever." So, like after our third session together, I said, "How's that anxiety?" He goes, "What anxiety?" We were making all kinds of progress in other areas. He totally forgot about it. And it's kind of the same thing with the ADHD. Once they can get control, selective control, then it turns really into almost a superpower as opposed to being a debilitation.
So you brought up something that I was going to ask you about, and that is how long does this last? Because well, I'm surprised that you said it's forever, because I would have assumed a little more along the lines of you can't go to the gym, get in shape, and then say, well, and now I'm in shape the rest of my
Yeah,
life, calling
that's
that
right.
good.
That's
Check
right.
the box.
That's right.
You know,
Yeah.
that use it or lose it, or neuroplasticity, once the brain is one way, it can have the ability to
Yeah.
go back
Yeah.
to being distracted again. You know what I mean? So are these practices something that you just kind of stick with to keep the brain functioning that way at its, optimal level, or what are you seeing for longevity?
Well, and it's interesting because I'm always learning too, right? So as one of our neuroscientists said, the changes were permanent because what we're actually really rewiring the brain's
Rewiring the
making new
brain.
connections,
Absolutely.
rewiring
Agreed.
completely.
Yep.
And unlike our bodies, where if we, you use it or lose it, the brain is that way too. But these connections are made so strong. Well, what happens though is this new performance becomes we call the new baseline. Yeah, then this is our new baseline.
It's the new
The new,
operating system that the brain's
the new
operating
normal.
from. Yep.
So then now they take it normal. So all of a sudden they're getting A's and they're, with less study. Well, that's their new normal. So from now on, they'll always be able to do that. I've gotten reached out to from Marines I worked with 15 years ago. And, because their exercises were all destroyed, the old ones. So I give them some new ones. So let's, for fun, let's just do a speed drill. Let's see. And they're almost where they were 15 years ago. And that's helped them through so many things in their life. Now, the thing is, though, about the exercises is we also have a couple we call them neuroprimers. So one of them is a 1 minute neuroprimer and a 5 minute neuroprimer. And these you can use anytime during the day. So you could be going through the training and overall things are improving. But if you need like a quick mental, speed up, kind of refocus, you can run through it for a couple of minutes and it gives you like that boost, like a cognitive boost.
Got it.
Again, one of my favorite, I got a million stories. So stories are, but Lydia Ann, she was a woman who started her own construction business in Montreal. So she's already under pressure, a woman in a male dominated industry. She was trying to get a certification when I started working with her. She was barely sleeping. She was so busy, so much time getting everything done. So we started doing this. Well, she started writing down, she's very meticulous, what she was accomplishing after she did a neuroprimer. And she was surprised to find that she was getting more done better with a neuroprimer. After about 3 weeks, she told me that she had freed up so much time she could start dating again. I'm like, wow, right? So
Huh.
changed her life completely, right? Because she was getting more done, business was growing, the stress was gone, and she'd freed up enough time to really start taking care of herself.
So if this, I mean, obviously there's nobody this doesn't work for. You've made that abundantly clear. But I'm certain that other folks that are listening are going to think, okay, there's one category of people that you haven't brought up yet, which comes to mind as got to be in the top three careers that would benefit from this, and that's the police department. So you want
Yeah,
to talk about having to make a snap decision that's
yeah.
life or death for either them or someone else. Have you seen this? Is this being embraced, welcomed, entertained? I mean, where are police departments, at least in the US, with thinking about incorporating this training as part of the police academy before they, actually even hit the street and get started?
Yeah, no, absolutely, you're right. I have worked with a number of police officers. I worked with a police department back in Evansville, Illinois. One of my favorite clients actually was referred to me because he was struggling with a lot of post-traumatic stress. He was a
Right.
police officer. I started working with him, and his story was just amazing. You know, I thought people credit me with stuff. I don't always know if it's all mine, but he said how one time a perp tried to run him over with his car without even seeing it. He was able to jump out of the way. He really felt this was helpful in no shoot situations because you will, the problem is under stress. That's why
Right.
civilians get shot, right? Because the officer is under so much stress. And the whole idea of, using larger muscles and smaller muscles, all those things kind of go away because one of the things we do for police officers and for the military, for any shooter, is we integrate a shooting motion with the brain training. So basically, any time that you're using your body at the same time you're making decisions, that's what makes those connections together. And so we did a lot of shooting drills, drawing drills, shooting, drills with the exercises, and he felt it was really, really helpful. So there are police departments. We have an opportunity to work with some first responders in a town in Texas coming up. Um, so so yeah, definitely for police officers. The key for me is getting into the department. Everyone we've ever worked with has improved.
Okay. Well, we got to get the word out. All right. That I'll work on that on my end, certainly with this podcast. That's for
Yeah.
darn sure because it is imperative. And the last group of people that I want to end on, and then I'll turn it over to you to see if there's a group that we haven't touched on or anything at all that we haven't touched on that we need to. But that's around PTSD
Yeah.
And certainly,
Yeah.
as we all know, the suicide rate that every year continues to go up, and most significantly of late is now our youth. That we have teenagers committing suicide at a faster rate than what has ever been the case before. So, specific now to PTSD, a lot of people before used to associate this, with the military. But
Yeah.
but since COVID, I mean, for crying out loud, that level of isolation and at a young age really wreaked havoc with a lot of people. What are you seeing with your work, whether it's the recurring nightmares, whether it's being triggered, whether it's not being able to handle bullying at school, where it's just all it's trauma,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the brain not knowing how to handle or process that in an effective way to live a meaningful life, whether that's career, relationship, their own
Right.
personal health with themselves. What are you seeing under that umbrella with this training?
So, and again, great questions. From the very early on, even that very first platoon that I work with, rampant PTSD, right? That's why they were so messed up, and it all went away. What I find, again, I focus more on the symptoms and how the symptoms get better. I don't always know why it works, but it always works. And one of the reasons I have a good friend that actually can help people with the actual trauma, release of trauma. I don't do that, but the symptoms go away. So many young Marines. One story, a young Marine, he said, I've deployed 5 times. I couldn't handle, I got triggered all the time. If my wife put ketchup on her burger, I'd freak out. He said,
Yeah,
after your training, it's all gone. I don't get stressed anymore. A SEAL I trained in San Diego, same thing. He said, well, a lot of problems, especially in the military, they don't want to get help because they don't want to leave their guys. They don't want to look weak.
right. They don't want to be
So
labeled.
he said,
Yep.
I was tearing my unit apart. I was angry all the time, which is a symptom of PTSD. You just can't control the anger. He said, it's all gone. I get along better with my guys. We're united. I get along better with my family. So it's the symptoms that go away. And a lot of that is that anticipation piece and the relaxed piece. I did some work with some inner city ministries in Chicago. Same kind of thing. The group we did work with, the violence went down. Why do we have violence? Because someone gets triggered and then the other person gets triggered and there's no impulse control. So one of the things the program helps with is impulse control. So I mean, if you can get that split second, right, where maybe I shouldn't do this,
Right.
right, that can de-escalate things a lot. So a lot of help with the PTSD. Again, not curing the trauma. The trauma is there, and I don't know how to help with the actual trauma, but the trauma is like it doesn't impact them anymore.
The symptoms of it, which is what matters, quite frankly. Okay, so is there anything, because I mean, holy cow, I could keep you here all day. Is there anything that we haven't talked about, because I don't know to ask about it, that on your end, hey, this is important, or this is one other aspect, or this is something that people should know that we haven't covered yet?
Well, just maybe some advice to your listeners. One of the
Great.
things, just be absolutely aware that everything you repeat changes your brain to make that the rut you're developing. Whatever it is, if it's your kids, right? Whatever it is, kids especially, you want to break those bad habits as soon as you can. But another thing for people to do is just try to, this comes from being more aware, is just try to get in the habit of thinking before you act. I mean, our mom always said that, right? Think before you act. But you can do that and you can start integrating that into little things. So something as simple as you're watching a TV show. What do you think's going to happen? Who's the bad guy? Who's the good guy? And then afterwards, you measure it. How good were you? How not good were you? One of the basic components of the thinking process is break it down, think it through, and execute. That's the basis for this program. So data is always coming into our mind. We have to break it down, think through what we want to do with it, and then execute. So in any situation, a conversation you're going to have, okay, break it down. Okay, what is the message I need to get across? What's probably going to happen? What are the distractions that are probably going to happen? Let me think through the most efficient communication that I can, and then when the time comes, just execute it. Because the more you practice that, the more it becomes in the unconscious, right? So now you're fully prepared. You're going to be, and so that really helps communication. It helps stress. It gives you a little bit of impulse control. So that's something people can start working on all the time.
I love this. And, you know, it's funny when you see, let's just take it, it's a work environment. You see two people talking and you see things starting to escalate a bit. And internally, you're going, oh, I can see where this is headed. And it's fascinating that
Yeah.
the other two can't because
Yes.
they're in it. You know,
Right.
how do you
Right.
not see where this is headed? You know, or
Mm.
any horror movie where you're going, okay, the dark alley. Can you not see where this is? Don't
Yeah.
go
Right.
there. But
Right.
I love your suggestion. Pay attention all the time because you're training your brain all the time in real time. Think and pay attention.
Yeah.
What's happening right here? What's
Yeah.
happening? How am I feeling? How am I responding? And you know, anybody in mindfulness training will always say before, you know, you've always got that thing that you just want to belt out. Breathe first.
Yes. Yes.
Hang
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
Breathe.
Right. Right.
Breathe, because that
Exactly.
first thought may not be the best one to share. That may
Yes.
not, that, in fact,
Right.
that first one may be the one you most regret. Right?
Yes. Exactly. That's right.
That's that knee
Right.
jerk. And I believe what you're saying is through training, that knee jerk will not only slow down, but over time won't even appear. That
Yeah.
first
Right.
negative, snappy thought will subside because your
Right.
brain is going to just start thinking more in process of, okay, what's going on here? What are they really asking of me? And we're not being so reactionary,
Right.
which
Absolutely.
it, which everybody benefits from. Okay, obviously the $1,000,000 question, how do people learn more about you? How do they find out about, well, let me ask this question. Is this something that is done online? Is this a one-on-one program? How does,
Yeah.
because you've mentioned many people directly and in session, so how is this program delivered and how can people access it?
That's a great question. We do have a video course, which is based actually Southern Utah University. I did a bunch of work up there, worked with the gymnastics team. They won their first ever conference championship. I worked with disabilities, different groups. They asked me to put together a video course, which I did, and now I sell that video course. It's a
Great.
good basic if people want a good, inexpensive way. It's video, so they can stop and pause it and do it with their friends or family. But other than that, we found I tried working with an app once. The key really is to work with someone. So I
Okay.
have certified trainers that help me. I work with all my results have been just me working with them because part of it is reading the people I'm working with because we know what we want to improve.
Hmm.
And depending on what we're observing, then we can adjust the training because we always want the brain to work where it struggles the most first because
Right.
that's where you get the biggest changes.
That's the
And that usually
boulder.
takes a lot of encouragement,
Yep.
right? I mean, it's amazing. I remember a volleyball team, this girls' volleyball team, I took them through them, and every time he made it a little bit harder. Oh man, I don't think we can do that, right? And then they get it, and then they get it. So their confidence is improving at the same time, right? But if I wasn't there to encourage them to take the next step, they probably wouldn't. And then we can customize it. So always best with an instructor.
Okay.
We have a couple different programs with it. Right now, combatbraintraining.com is the website. It's
Okay.
undergoing a major upgrade. Hopefully that'll be done in another week or so, but that's the best place. There's some information, some testimonials. They can book a session with me, an exploratory session with me if they want to talk about what their problems are, what they want to work on, where they want to get helped. And
And
you
then
know,
is that virtual, right? Someone doesn't have to fly to you. That these are virtual
no, oh, yes.
sessions.
Good question. Yeah, I work with
Okay.
all over the world. In fact,
Okay.
I just trained a professional rugby team in Japan over Zoom a couple weeks ago.
Holy Toledo.
So
Okay. So
Zoom,
it's
welcome to
literally
training in
anywhere.
Zoom.
Anybody listening anywhere because we have listeners around the world. So it's literally
Oh,
wherever you are
perfect.
works. Okay.
Yes. Yes. I
Okay.
love to do it in person. I mean, I absolutely in person, but 99% of it's over Zoom.
Okay, got it. And so that is your website, and then the videos, they can purchase that through your website as well?
On the website, yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay, and then do you post anything on social media? Is there anything on YouTube? Are there videos out and about or not really?
Yes, the link to my YouTube channel, I'm just building out. So that's where the dinosaur comes in, right? I'm rapidly expanding my social media, but I haven't. It's always been referrals and
Yes.
everything. But I want to
Okay,
get the word out there. I want to encourage people. So we're
good. So
starting
do
to
I.
build on all the different social media. I've got a guy working on that right now.
Okay,
So they'll be
perfect.
able to do
Okay.
more.
Well, we'll put that on the link on show notes so people can go there and keep in mind that's going to be ever improving. So check back and stay tuned. But I love that you are accessible and people can work with you
Yeah.
virtually. I know for a fact right now you're going to get reached out to by people because there's people that need help in all the areas. I quite frankly wish
Yeah.
every police department would reach out to you. I'll do my best to promote that too.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Thank you.
so that said, now that people know how to reach out to you, and we've certainly tickled their interest enough to say, okay, here's another tool that could be in my toolbox. That, like we said, neuroplasticity. Once that hardwiring is done, that's permanent, and that's your new baseline. That's your new hard drive that you're operating from to improve all areas of life. There's no reason not to. Okay, I'm excited. So
Yeah.
I close. I am getting a hold of you. So I close the show the same way every time, asking the same question. What is one thing that you absolutely believe to be true?
Absolutely the truth. There's hope for people. And the reason I know that is since I've started working on this, I have become a much stronger believer in God, that He designed this. I mean, the people, the healing that I've seen, the lives that have been changed, it's all part of His plan. I mean, He designed our brains this way. We're just kind of discovering how it works. So I would say I absolutely believe God has a plan for everybody, and He wants us to find our purpose and do it, and He'll help.
Perfect. And that's it. If there's a great message to take into the new year, don't give up. It
Yeah,
just means you haven't found that solution yet, but it doesn't mean
right.
that it's not out there, right? God's delays are not God's denials. So it's out there.
Right.
And maybe this was the podcast that you needed to hear to make that next step forward. So thank you. Thank you for all the work that you've done with the military and beyond. And thank you for the wisdom you're sharing and continue to share. I look forward to staying connected with you and on your journey and
Yeah.
promoting your work. It's fascinating as all get out, and I love it. So truly, thank you for your time and for everything that
Yeah.
you do.
Thank you. Thank you. It's
All right.
great.
And everybody, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Game Changer Podcast.